I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah. That is what I heard them say way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, yeah, we have sorely changed. Eh, eh, see, I'll be buried in my grave before I become a slave, yeah, yeah. That is what I heard them say, yeah. Way back in the day. I'll be buried in my grave, yeah, before I become a slave, yeah, yeah, yeah. But it seems like since that day, yeah, we have sorely changed. Whoa. Eh, eh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh. Whoa, oh, 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 oh.
And now, live from beautiful Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, you're watching My Fellow Americans with your host, Spike Cohen.
Yes. Oh, thank you. Oh, please. Thank you. Oh, gosh. Every week you do this, and it sounds almost exactly the same. Keep clapping. Clap for the Christmas miracle. How would we know that you wanted the Christmas miracle if you didn't keep clapping? Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen, and I'm remembering right now to put my phone on silent because that thing's going to go off in any second now. There we go. Welcome to My Fellow Americans. I am literally Spike Cohen, and this is a special, it's a Christmas episode because Christmas is almost coming, but it's not actually a Christmas episode because I don't have anything Christmas themed going on. But welcome to the show anyway. We have a fantastic guest, and we're going to be talking about a very, very serious subject. We're going to have a lot of education and insight in doing so. This is a Muddy Waters Media production. Check us out everywhere, on all social media platforms, on all podcasting platforms. Check us out quickly on YouTube before they delete us because of the Rudolph thing from yesterday. But be sure to tune into us on everything, whatever you are listening to us or watching us on right now. If you are not already, follow us or like us or subscribe to us or whatever the thing is that you do on that thing to be able to stay tuned to everything that we do. And if you're doing it on YouTube, again, before they kick us off, don't just hit subscribe, hit the little bell next to it, because I want your phone to literally explode with notifications every single time we do anything on Muddy Waters Media. And of course, be sure to share this right now if you're watching it live, or even if you're not watching it live. Share it right now. The last thing that I want is for you and your closest loved ones to miss out on a libertarian podcast that's roughly an hour long on a Wednesday evening. Give the gift of Spike Cohen today. Kids love it. And of course, I keep forgetting this part. Also, be sure to become a subscriber to Muddy Waters Media. Become a member of the Mud Militia. We need to come up with a name for this. Become a subscriber to Muddy Waters Media. Gives you access to members-only content, to an ad-free experience on Spotify and Anchor, and every month we do the Muddied Zoom, where we all hang out on a Zoom call, and only you get to do that. Only you and the other subscribers, so be sure to do that. This episode, of course, is brought to you by the Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus, the second largest caucus in the Libertarian Party and the fastest growing caucus in the Libertarian Party. That is a true statement. Both of those are. If you'd like to become a member of the fastest growing movement in the party, oddly enough, go to the Facebook group Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus and become an official member today. And if you'd like to become an official voting member, which means absolutely nothing because we don't vote on it, we don't actually do anything. But if you'd like to have merchandise with this logo on it, go to the Muddy Waters Media store, go to muddywatersmedia.com, press the store, and you can buy Libertarian Party Waffle House Caucus gear. The Gravy King, Joe Solosky. Joe Solosky is running for governor of Pennsylvania. Joe Solosky is, dare I say, the key to Pennsylvania's success. And it just so happens to say that on this graphic. If you'd like to help Joe become the first libertarian governor ever, then go to his website right now to see how you can help. JoeSolosky.com. JoeSolosky.com. Mudwater, the most appropriately named sponsor of Muddy Waters Media. If you woke up today and said, my God, if I never have another cup of coffee again in my life, it'll be too soon. Well, folks, I have some fantastic news for you. We have this product that it's not coffee. It is decidedly not coffee. It is instead masala chai, cacao, mushrooms, turmeric, sea salt, cinnamon, and literally nothing else. And if you're thinking, Spike, those sound like an interesting ingredients to put together in something that I then drink. And you're right. You're going to want to get some honey or sugar or something to have with this. But it's very good for you. It is neuroprotective. It's neuroprotective, whatever that means. It has 1/7 of the caffeine of coffee, and I actually use this every day. It gives you just enough caffeine to have you all pepped up like this, but not with so much caffeine that you end up crashing and later on having heart problems and certain types of cancers like this. So if you'd like to join that revolution of not drinking too much caffeine in the morning, go to muddywatersmedia.com, or no, muddywatersoffreedom.com/mud. I got to update this, and get your starter pack of Mudwater today. Jack Casey has written 3 books. What are they about? I don't know. And I'm never going to read these books. I never will read these books, but you should. The Royal Green, In Silver Throne, and Crowned by Gold. In Silver Throned, sorry, and Crowned by Gold. And I will never read these books because if these books are bad, then I'll feel bad for trying to get you to buy them. And if they're good, then I'll feel bad for making fun of them twice a week. But you can find out what these books are about. I'm sure they're great. Go to theroyalgreen.com and you can get 1, 2, or even all 3 of them today. Thomas Queter is running for state senate in the 52nd District of New York. Thomas Queter says, I run better than Albany, which he finds hilarious because he's crippled in a wheelchair. And he pays me to say that on this. And it's the most uncomfortable part of this show. And I get it out of the way early because I don't like having to say it. And he really likes it. He tunes in just to watch me say it. So if you'd like to help someone with that kind of sense of humor, he's actually a great guy. He's one of the best people I know. And New York could do no better than to have someone like him in the state senate. If you'd like to help him become the first libertarian state senator in New York, go to tomfor52.com. That's TOMFOR52.com. We're almost done, folks. Defy the power and stitches and glitches. The finest, best tumblers that have ever been made ever. And I say that objectively, not because they pay me to advertise. These are the best tumblers ever. And if you buy some today, they have free customization. That's right, folks. You don't pay another penny for customization, which is insane because that's usually where they get you. But they don't get you there. They get you by not doing that. stitchesandglitches.com and defythepower.com. Folks, if you watch this and said, Spike, I cannot believe you just had that many sponsors at once. I'm going to sue you. Well, good luck, pal, if you're in Florida, because I'm going to sue you back with personal injury attorney Chris Reynolds, attorney at law. That's right, folks. If you're being sued or if you want to sue someone else and you live in the great state of Florida, you can use Chris Reynolds, attorney at law, for all of your personal injury civil claims. Chris Reynolds will get you so much money that you'll be able to walk around with big, stupid stacks of money and pretend that you're on the phone when it's not. It's just money. You know that thing they do, like with the rappers, and they'll hold it and they'll be like, hey, mom, I love. Oh, this isn't my phone. This is a giant stack of $100 bills. That can be your life if you go to chrisreynoldslaw.com. The intro and outro music to this and every episode of God, what is this show called? My Fellow Americans. I'm on too many shows. Comes from the amazing and talented Mr. Joe Davi. That's Jodavi. Check him out on Facebook. Go to his SoundCloud. Go to his Bandcamp. joedavimusic.bandcamp.com. Tell them about that one time at Bandcamp that you bought all of Joe Davi's discography for less than $25. Go there today, joedavimusic.bandcamp.com. Thank you so much, Joe Davi. I'd like to thank Eliza Bleu for this water that I drink on most episodes. They're not even a sponsor. I just like the water that much. Full of Banaka. Shout out to Tehran Turks' Momnum as always. Folks, my guest tonight is a survivor advocate for those that are affected by human trafficking. She is also a survivor of human trafficking herself, and she goes around the country to educate folks, including policymakers, on how to best identify and end trafficking in our time. She's here to talk about this growing problem and what we can do to stop it as often as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow Americans, please welcome to the show Ms. Eliza Bleu. Eliza, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi, Spike. Thank you so much for having me.
So you're welcome, and thank
that
you for
intro
coming
was
on.
Hilarious.
Thank you.
Could you hear me laughing in the background? I was just dying.
Well, and then you have to seamlessly go from that to, and speaking of trafficking, and so we're bringing it down. We're taking it down to another level now. So we first met in person at Freedom Fest in July, at which time I said, hey, I'd like to have you on the show. And you said, hey, that sounds great. And so for the last 5 months, it's been like the greatest draw. I think this might break the record. I've had a couple guests that have taken 2-3 months to get on. I think 5 months you might be the reigning champion for the hardest guest to actually. And I booked you 3 times actually, but I kept having problems.
I wasn't the problem. I wasn't the problem. Let's slow that down. I don't want people to think that I'm a difficult person to book. But I wasn't the problem. No offense, Spike. It's the truth.
None taken. I was 100% the problem. So actually, I get the record for most difficult host and booker. But seriously, thank you so much for your patience and for coming on. And folks, be sure to ask me and Eliza your questions, and we will tell you if you are right or wrong. Now, Eliza, this is your first time on the show. And whenever I have someone on the show for the first time, I ask them to kind of give their genesis story of what got them here doing what they're doing right now. So, tell us a little bit about what got you into becoming a advocate for the survivors of human trafficking. Tell us the Eliza Bleu story.
Sure. I'll give the abridged version. I went to a concert when I was 15 years old. I met a photographer there. I was thinking about it in preparation for this interview today, whether or not his actual profession was being a photographer. That question I'll probably never have answered. I know that he took pictures, but I'm not sure if he was a legitimate photographer now in retrospect. But I met a gentleman that said that, he wanted to make me a star, take pictures of me. This individual spent 2 years grooming me. I like to be very clear when I'm telling portions of my story that I'm 40 years old now. So the internet and, even cell phones weren't as readily available, and I did not really have access to them in the same way that we do now. So nowadays with social media, things work much more quickly. But this individual spent time, groomed me for 2 years by landline phone calls and handwritten letters. And I was homeschooled. So I had the ability to graduate early. Even though I don't look at homeschool as a bad thing. In fact, I highly encourage it. And I'm very grateful that I was homeschooled. I do think that it worked against me in this particular case because that was my vulnerability. I had only really been exposed to really good people. So my family didn't really tell me how evil the world really could be or how evil people could be. I was very trusting. I still am. And so I believed this individual, and he sold me the dream. He groomed me, sold me the dream, and told me he was going to make me a star if I moved out to Hollywood into Los Angeles. And I told my parents, I said, you're going to let me go. I'm going to go with or without your permission. So it's better if we stay in contact. I was pretty wild back then, pretty punk rock. I still kind of am. And I went out there, and literally the first day, a beer was introduced. And by the way, prior to this, I was not a promiscuous teenager or really active.
Okay.
A beer was introduced. Alcohol was also not a part of my story, and I also don't come from an abusive family. My family structure is really amazing. Parents are still together. They're awesome, incredible people. They're very much in love, and I'm very grateful for that. But so I wasn't used to alcohol. After I'd had the beer, then the drugs were introduced, and then after the drugs were introduced, it became clear what was going on. At the time, that was actually around the time that the first law in the United States was being written about human trafficking. So we didn't have the language to put to it that we do now. And so I wasn't able to identify that I was being trafficked. That wasn't something that went through my head. I was just scared. I was whacked out of my mind. And I was sold right away to an individual in Hollywood, a different individual in Hollywood, for $500. And that was the first time it happened. Fortunately, that time I was able to get away because I had an overdose. I was so difficult to deal with that. Keep in mind also too, I just like to say I was a minor at the time because I graduated early. I moved out there right before I turned 18. So I did have an overdose. I ended up in Cedars-Sinai Hospital. And afterwards, people ask sometimes why I didn't ask the medical professionals for help. I didn't have the language to put to it. Now we talk about it a lot more openly. That is one thing I'm very grateful for about the Epstein case, is that I feel like we finally can have these conversations, and they can be, I just feel like we're finally starting to get some of the language. I mean, even the fact that I'm on your show, the fact that people engage with my Twitter, these are not things that would have been possible back in that time period.
Right.
So I'm grateful for that. We made a lot of progress. But unfortunately, because that initial trauma was there, because I never was transparent about what happened, with anyone that was older than me or that maybe could help me, I was really embarrassed. I thought it was my fault. Because I was never fully transparent, I never received the healing that I had deserved. And I did get some help, but it wasn't because I wasn't being honest about what had happened. I was just scared. I was scared I'd go to jail. Like, you know what I mean? I just saw all these things would happen. Right. And I was naive. I was from a farm, homeschool girl from the farm, just trying to be cool, fit in, do a thing. And it just blew up in my face. But unfortunately, because that initial trauma was there, this was a pattern that kept kind of popping up in my life. After that, I had ended up in an abusive marriage, not a human trafficking marriage. I'd like to be very specific, a domestic violence marriage for a short period of time, multiple sexual assaults because of different issues. But then unfortunately, I chose to go back to the lifestyle later on in life. I went to be a cocktail server at a gentleman's club. They told me they wouldn't hire me unless I auditioned to dance. Never thought I'd be beautiful enough to do that because I always had this vision of everybody being so gorgeous, but I auditioned to dance. I made a ton of money that day. And so I willingly chose to be an adult entertainer. But unfortunately, what happened in that environment was that I met my other trafficker, and I was trafficked again, sex trafficked again through coercion. So it's two different stories. I like to be really honest about that. Another big part of my story is that I did leave this abuser, the one when I was an adult. I did leave. I went to a safe house for 3 months. It was a 2-year program, and my trauma bond and Stockholm syndrome, a lot of folks call it a trauma bond, with him was so strong that I left that safe house and went back. And that was a repeated pattern for a very long time. So I do like to be very clear when I'm talking about human trafficking. It's force, fraud, or coercion for the sale of labor or sex. I noticed in your Twitter post, I wasn't going to correct you earlier, but I like to talk about all types of human trafficking.
I realized that after I put it up. Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. I was like an honest mistake, and I wasn't bummed about it. But, there's an entire picture there. And I think, I probably talk about sex trafficking most, but I do also try to include labor trafficking as well, because they easily go together. They're two crimes that really fit well together. So where you find one, you often find the other. And I think that's really important. And also labor trafficking victims deserve support as well, right? Um, so, but it's a broad term. But yeah, I talk about force, fraud, or coercion for the sale of labor or sex. And then there are other things that fall under that umbrella as well. But yeah, I kept returning to my former abuser. And then, you know, a series of events happened and the consequences on my life. I knew I was going to die that way. I don't know. I don't really know what it was. It was something inside of me. I'm grateful because I always have had fight, a lot of fight. A lot of libertarians have fight, I notice, but maybe not harnessed in the right direction, but that's for a whole other discussion. But not you, Spike. Sorry, that wasn't a dig at you.
Not
But
me. The
not
other
you.
libertarian. Yes, not me.
But there was something in me always that just told me fight, fight, fight. And I had tried so many times, so many different things to have a better life, to do something different, well, the other thing too is my self-esteem was very low. And I thought that was all I was worth. But one thing that's important was, even though when I went to the safe house, I didn't stay. What happened there at that safe house was that they started to plant those seeds of hope and that I was worth a little bit more. So even though it didn't work, I guess, it didn't work, but it did start to work, because once you have the truth in your head, and once you hear a different story, and once you hear hope and maybe that there's a different life out there for you, even when you return to your former abuser, or I should just speak for myself, even when I returned to my former abuser, he didn't have those same ties on me, and that trauma bond was not as strong, and I could kind of see through the BS. So I started to think maybe there was a chance, maybe I could do something. I just didn't want to die that way. That was always my biggest fear. I had been arrested multiple times, had a lot of consequences on my life, permanent scars on my face, and, my life was in the gutter, but I just felt like maybe there was a chance. And so I left, and I haven't been back since, which is really good. But I think I'm grateful now, because given the current state of the world, it gives me a perspective on freedom and liberty. Because when you lose it, once you finally get it back, you don't ever want to lose it again.
Right.
So for that, I am very grateful, because given the current state of the world, I think I'm willing to put more fight behind it, just because I haven't always had it.
Right. And not only that, but you're also fighting for others to be able to experience that freedom as well. Something that I noted, find that surprised me in your story, and I first heard this when you talked about it at Freedom Fest. We have so many stereotypes about trafficking. First of all, there's the, the movie Taken, the trafficking where they come and break down your door and, kidnap you and, blindfold you and do that thing. And I'm sure that is a real thing that happens as well. But so much of the trafficking looks so much more like what you went through. But also the stereotype of even who is trafficked, even in your type of situation. You assume that the person has been abused, so that's already been normalized for them, or that they have drug issues, or that their family has had drug issues or abuse issues. You assume that they're, already potentially, very sexually active. And so this just seems normal. You were the opposite of all those things, which in a way made you in one way made you more vulnerable to it, because you had such a great social support network and family. You didn't really know what an abuser would look like. You couldn't see those things because you didn't have any kind of perspective on those things. You didn't really know what it looked like. And then once you got kind of thrust into it, you now had the shame, the guilt and the shame of it, that kind of made you think, well, I guess this is what I deserve. Is that like the most, I know there's probably not hard stats on this, but is that the common, is this a or one of the most common versions of trafficking, where someone gets into it and maybe doesn't even realize that they're actually being a also, and as a side note here, I hear terms victim and survivor. Is there a difference wherein like a victim is someone that's still actively going through it and a survivor is someone who isn't, or do you just use the term survivor across the board? I just want to make sure I'm using terminology correctly.
Yeah, so victim would be a legal term, what you'd be called
Okay.
legally.
Okay.
And then also too, if you're actively being abused, you would be
Okay.
considered a victim. But we like survivor because it's empowering. But mainly because it's empowering. Using survivor, but I oftentimes like I'll flip back between both, or sometimes I'll be writing a tweet and I'll be talking about both those who are currently being abused and have also survived. So I'll have
Okay.
to differentiate.
Hmm.
But victim would be the legal term. So
Okay. So
that's the
for
difference.
someone who's actively, then I'll just say someone who's, actively being tracked, is this a common, is your story one of the more common stories of how someone ends up being trafficked, that they really didn't see it coming and for quite some time maybe even thought that this was something that they were choosing to do? Is that what the face of trafficking often is?
So we do have all the data and statistics on this. We've been
Oh, okay.
collecting predominantly like in the United States. You check like the Polaris Project website. They've been running the human trafficking hotline. They've been collecting data and statistics in the United States alone for over 10 years. But globally, we have a lot of data and statistics. The UN, of course, puts out quite a bit of information. But so I never like to say normal because every survivor story is different. It's very probable that you will know your abuser in advance. This is very probable. I wish I knew the actual statistic. I believe it's in the 90s per 90th percentile. Somebody
Oh,
can
wow.
in the chat can throw in the actual stat. But a lot of times it's familial. But almost oftentimes, your abuser ahead of time, a caregiver, a boyfriend, a significant other, a parent. This is very common, but human trafficking is force, fraud, or coercion. So we are talking about the coercive aspect where you are coerced into being trafficked. It's
Right.
very confusing and difficult for folks to understand. I think a lot of times people can identify more with a domestic violence relationship. I think when folks, but I think gratefully we're at a point in culture and society where we understand kind of domestic violence and what that's like. Um,
Right.
think about in those terms when you're thinking about trafficking. When you look at the movie Taken, for instance, which I actually think has probably been our biggest setback as the anti-human trafficking movement, was that movie Taken. Yeah, it's very entertaining, but that's not like data and statistics just don't speak to that
Right.
whatsoever, but it can happen. So that
Yeah.
would be your force. That would be your force, but it isn't in a trafficker's best interest to force you. It would be in their best interest and most financially beneficial for them to love you, for them to feel like they owe you something. Their goal is to get as much money out of you as humanly possible. You are seen as a
Right.
product. So if you're non-compliant, and if you're difficult and if you become a liability, they won't make as much money as possible. It's best that you're compliant. So that's how a trafficker will treat it, like it's a business transaction.
Well, and that would make sense, right? Like someone who's either not compliant or just complying so that they can stay alive isn't exactly the hot thing on the sex trafficking market or the labor trafficking market for that matter. That someone who's doing the bare minimum to not, be punished for it, as opposed to someone who thinks this is good that I'm doing this. I'm actively choosing this. You routinely share a lot of different articles that talk about
All day,
investigations into story. What's that?
all day,
But yeah, literally all day. I thought I
literally
do a
all
lot of
day to the point where it's depressing.
well, and so that was actually what I was gonna part of what I was gonna ask you. You are routinely posting article, and not just of like, because you'll share like five schmucks got caught trafficking some women or trafficking some kids or something. Just like idiots that get caught victimizing people. But then you'll also routinely share police officers being involved in human trafficking rings, politicians being involved in human trafficking rings, the people who are shocked by, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, Prince Andrew, that's the tip of the iceberg. When you're sharing this stuff, I don't have this perspective of having been through trafficking or anything like that. Is that a fight that you have to make sure that you are, protecting yourself? Honestly, like when we were booking this, I kept asking you questions to make sure that I was protecting your well-being and so forth. Is that a battle that you still have, or are you at a point now where you've been doing it so long that you're able to kind of separate those things? Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I stepped forward to be a public survivor leader in April 2020 because of the global pandemic and because of the first lockdown. And when I did it, I didn't necessarily have a game plan, but as we've moved ahead, I've been able to figure out a little bit better my flow, what works best for advocacy. But a large thing that I wanted to do, well, I had a couple visions. First, I wanted to show that survivors are awesome, and that we're not depressed. Well, it's funny because I did cry on this podcast already, but generally speaking, my general vibe, talking about my story is like the worst part of my life, period. I simply hate it. I don't like to revisit it. I simply hate it, especially in public. It's still embarrassing, but whatever. I can get past it. But everything else, I'm like really happy person and like hype and excited.
So
and
we
lit
start with that. So we made sure to start with that. I told you ahead of time, I was like, we have to touch on it just so people know your perspective, but let's move on with it. But I figured let's get the sad part out of the way and then we can move on from there. Yeah.
Oh, good. And I also too feel like I have a good relationship with everyone that I've done interviews with, where if I really was up to it that day, I could probably just say, hey, we're not going to do that. Like I did Zuby Music's podcast. We didn't talk about my story at all. Not because I asked that. He just asked other questions. We didn't talk about it at all. In fact, I talk about my story so little that people have to ask for it because it's hard to find the full in its entirety. That's intentional. I always wanted my public survivor advocacy to be more about advocacy, less about me and my story. I feel like when I tell my story, it is one story and it's very cherry picked. I like to talk about the crime as a whole, but that's just my personal perspective. But when I started tweeting about human trafficking, I never expected that. Well, I never expected I would be, I just never expected anything. I never expected I'd be speaking at Freedom Fest, talking to a vice president candidate, like all these things I never saw coming. Like, I just did not see it coming. So I rode the wave. But one thing that I wanted to do was show how awesome survivors are, not just me, other survivors, that we have a sense of humor. We have a cool life. We are awesome and we are capable of doing really incredible things. Because the truth is I meet some really amazing survivors. And I firmly believe that if you could show the world how awesome survivors are once they're given the opportunity to be free, that it will ignite a fire where more people want to help more individuals be free. Because the truth is survivors have such an awesome perspective. I want them to be free so that they can go on to change the world. But the other thing I wanted to do is also show that this is a very real and serious crime, and it's actually happening. Even though I hate the corporate press, I decided to, instead of going like, I hate the word conspiracy theory because I have conspiracy theories about how it started. But anyway, I think that might be a CIA thing, but I wanted to steer away from more of a conspiracy theory mind frame or more of a misinformation mind frame about human trafficking and stick to more corporate press and other issues. Sorry about that noise. But I just wanted to keep it very fact-based. The other thing I've tried to do really hard, Spike, is take my own personal political bias out. Even though I hate the corporate press and even though I hate the United States government and them being involved in anything to do with trafficking, I try to meet people where they're at, and I realize not everybody's there. Yep. So I have made it a mission to show people like, look, this is just what's in the corporate press every day. Yep. There's so many articles I have to choose. I only post about 1/3 of them. And this is like regular main corporate press every day. It's all day, every day. And So it is difficult for me, but when I look at the stories now, because I'm an advocate, I look at them more like a puzzle piece. It's not more like a puzzle. I'm thinking about what maybe could have prevented the crime, how this happened. I'm thinking about it totally differently. Other people look at it and they're in horror, and they're like, my only fear of Spike actually is not for me, is more that I'm traumatizing other survivors who follow me. But I also feel like it needs to be exposed. People need to be talking about this. And the more I talk about it, the more it's normalized.
Yeah.
Does that have any logic to it?
No, it does. It does, because what you're doing, you're normalizing the survivors, and not just in that, we're people who deserve respect, and we need people to help us fight this, but also, like, you keep mentioning we're awesome. We live good lives. Like, survivors aren't just these broken people who had this terrible experience, and what a terrible thing, and we should all feel sorry for them. It's this bad thing happened. We want to do the best that we can to rectify what happened and make sure that it's happening to as close to zero people as we possibly can moving forward. But you're not a broken person, and you're going to still live a great life. And these other folks that have gone through this and are going through this can also live great lives. And, exposing that this is happening, and then also showing the people. I do a similar thing where I don't want to just constantly be complaining about the government. And so I mix complaining about the government with showing times where reforming or repealing of bad things government did led to good outcomes. I also point a lot at people that are doing good work, people like you, people, homeless advocates, people that are out helping those in need, people that are helping during disasters. I want
And
to
by the
show.
way, sorry to interrupt you,
Sure,
but
sure.
folks that are serving homeless populations and folks that are serving during disasters are inadvertently serving human trafficking survivors as well, because those that are at a higher risk, that are experiencing homelessness, that are experiencing disaster, that have lost everything, if you are serving homeless populations, or those that are struggling with addictions, you are serving folks that are at very high risk, and maybe stopping trafficking before it starts. Sorry.
No, that's incredible. That's good to know. And I'm trying to present a holistic picture at it, that yes, this is a problem. We're identifying it, and here's what we can do about it. But in the meantime, life is not all misery and doom and gloom. There's a much better picture, and here's how we can maximize the good and minimize the bad. And it seems like that's what you're doing. Now, I looked it up right before we went live. As of the last count, human trafficking worldwide is estimated to be around $150 billion a year global industry. And they even admitted that they really don't know how much higher than that it could be, because it's in the shadows and they don't have a good picture of it. Which puzzles me, that there seem to have been, and this is, you were talking conspiracy theory, in the midst of us hearing that human trafficking is at an all-time high around the globe, in the midst of stories about Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein and Prince Andrew, and the fact that almost every major political figure is tied in some way to some either Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein or some other trafficker. It's puzzling that then it seems like I'm seeing more and more in the press about how this is kind of an overblown thing, and maybe we're talking about it too much. That feels very tinfoil hat, but yet I keep seeing it. Am I the only one? Are you seeing this as well?
Of course. I was on a flight on my way to a wedding, and I think I might have been I don't want to claim some like valor that's not mine, but I believe I was probably the first one to see that Atlantic article that probably doesn't work for them. Just so happened, I have my ways of getting information, and the Atlantic article, gosh, what was it called? The Great Fake. I don't want to actually say what the article was called because we're on YouTube, and I don't know. I just there are many articles.
It's go ahead. Sorry, I just pulled it up.
There are many articles. Even some politicians and other individuals that have a vested interest in making this seem like it's not a big deal. Anyone can follow my Twitter feed for a day and realize that we are in a really big deal in the United States. I mean, we could talk about around the globe, but if we're sticking just to the United States, I mean, we are at I think after the pandemic, it's hard not to get black pilled. I'm not black pilled. I'm pretty white pilled. I see some lights at the end of the tunnel, but it's really bad. I mean, there's some validity to some things that folks say. There's some validity to some things that folks say. Yes, a lot of missing children are found. So that's the good news, right? A lot of missing children are found. So when you look at that huge number of children that go missing every year, that's not, yes, they go missing, but you have to think that's runaways. That's folks being taken by non-custodial, those children being taken by non-custodial parents.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's not like that. Like you think that many children are just disappearing off the face of the earth. That's not what it is.
Right.
It would be awesome if we changed that language because it's just not factual. And I'm totally down with that if they want to keep it to that. But the other issue, so something that is important though, is the same. So the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children collects a lot of our data statistics just about children, child sexual abuse material, runaways, trafficking, things of that nature, specifically for children. So they are the ones that would collect that number, that big number that folks see, but also they're the ones that collected the number that 1 in 6 of those runaway children are trafficked for sex. So that's one of the reasons why I push out all the missing children. Now I just post any missing person. And it's wild how many individuals go missing in the United States, especially children, indigenous women. It's black and brown folks. It's really hard to keep up with it. I try to post as many as I see, even elderly folks at this point, because I'm like, oh, whatever, I'm just posting missing people. So at this point, I want, why should I discriminate if someone's elderly and in danger? I might as well post. But just to think about that number 1 in 6 of runaways, and that's on there. That's on the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children's website for 2020. I'm sure for 2021 it might change, but because the data is, it always changes. But so it is really important that we stick to the facts, and the corporate press sometimes doesn't want to stick to the facts. They're almost more conspiratorial than the conspiracy theorists, to be honest. But one thing that really did throw a wrench in our spokes was, I'm trying to think, if we were going to go pooling, if we were going to play pool, what would I might as well just say it. I always try to QAnon, because I was trying not to say it on your channel. But QAnon.
Go ahead. No, we fight YouTube constantly, so don't worry about it. We talk
okay,
about
I didn't want to get somebody banned.
We talk about everything.
QAnon was a big wrench in our spokes because it just didn't work. It had the opposite effect, and it's a good target for the corporate press.
Yep.
To pick on. So I highly encourage. I'm not going to say all of it wasn't factual, but what a hot mess. So yeah, they like to pick on that, and they also closely associate with that with Trump and all that. You know what I mean? It's like a whole mess.
Well, that was what I noticed in that article, in the great fake child sex trafficking epidemic. It seemed immediately they tried tying anyone who was fighting against sex trafficking with QAnon and the Trump campaign and the intellectual dark web and the far right, and certainly there are people that are in those camps that are doing this stuff, and like you said, some of them are going, you're trying to talk about real instances of trafficking, and they're talking about Martians taking, lizards taking children to Mars and stuff like that.
And by the way, I love talking about crazy stuff too. Like, I love it. Anybody that really knows me and follows me closely, I'm like super down to talk about whatever. I'll go there. I love it. I love talking about it. I love talking about all this stuff.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, this is a very real and serious crime. And if you can't win over, I don't know. I just have my own method, and I think it works pretty well. Meet people where they're at, give them facts, give them actual stories to read about how these individuals were exploited. Show them what the government's doing, show them what the government's not doing, show them all facets of it, show them the entire picture, and let the person decide, let people decide. But I think to hyper focus on the global elites, which we can do literal to nothing about, was never something that was appealing to me. I think what is much more beneficial is working on a local level, serving survivors, getting involved in your community by offering education, awareness, and prevention so that the crime doesn't happen in the first place. That's something you can do to stop human trafficking, because I guarantee you it is happening. Sometimes I tell folks, like, go ahead and Google like your town or the closest city and see how many trafficking articles pop up. Like it will blow your mind, or just, child sexual abuse material, labor trafficking, even sometimes if folks look around, it is there, and you can be much more helpful instead of spending all day online trying to figure out some puzzle that the feds cooked up, or who knows what CIA, I don't even know who knows what that weird psyop was, but instead of sitting there trying to figure out all this, whatever, you could be serving survivors on a local level and stopping somebody from returning to their abuser by offering them support, care, maybe stopping the crime from happening in the first place. I think that's much more overall benefit.
Right. This is not the time to tell people that birds aren't real. Like there's another time.
So I'm not 100%. My best friend brought that up the other day. Shout out to Amanda. I love her. She brought that up because, but I haven't heard this one, which is really weird because I've heard them all.
No, there's not. They started replacing them with drones. Right after I say this isn't the time to tell them, now I'm going to tell them. They started replacing them with drones in the 50s and 60s. It's expected that the last ones were killed around 2001. And now they're all drones. So when you see a bird, you tell it to get a warrant. But this isn't the time to talk about that. I mean,
to be honest, Spike, I'm pretty far down I'm far down. I'm far down. I just don't, when it comes to work life, like I said, I don't know if I said it before we went on air or whatever, but you have to meet people where they're at. Right. Not everybody's there. You know what I mean? If I go full, whatever, if I go full blown, that's not meeting people where they're at. And also too, the other thing I like to keep in the back of my mind is, so when I step forward to receive support as a survivor, I thought that the government owed me something. I was irritated that the government wasn't stepping in to help me. And my journey, my personal political journey, or, I want to make sure all survivors that follow me feel that they get content so I'll post a CNN article, even though I hate CNN, think they're complete pedophiles. But I'll post it because that might be where a different survivor is at. And I want them to see, like, look, we're all talking about this. We are all talking about this. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. And the thing, I share, I blast the corporate media as much as the next person, but I will share articles, mainstream media articles, if they have demonstrated a point that we're trying to make, and that there's no reason not to. Something that happened, especially maybe a few years ago when they started debating the FOSTA-SESTA Act, and which ultimately ended up making the problem worse. But during that time and long before it,
what made what problem worse?
Made both the problem of sex trafficking on the internet, because it kind of pushed it deeper into the shadows, and then it also made
where did you get that information?
Where did I get the information about FOSTA, SESTA making things worse?
No, where did you get the information that it shoved it underground, that it shoved internet sex trafficking underground and made it worse?
The information that I had read, op-eds and articles and studies that had talked about it. I will admit, you probably know much more than me.
Information from an op-ed?
No, not just from op-eds, from studies and everything else. But if you know better than me, you can tell me. Tell me what happened. How did FOSTA and SESTA help?
I mean, my issue with FOSTA-SESTA, and I mean, this is a deal. Everybody likes to throw FOSTA-SESTA under the bus. And you know what? They speak from a place of privilege because they don't understand how difficult it is to get these FOSTA-SESTA cases through. Okay. And honestly, I feel like, not you, Spike, I'm not coming, you're not trying to be malicious or anything, but I mean, so I don't think people understand how difficult it is for these minor survivors or survivors of sex trafficking to receive justice, period, especially not against these tech platforms. This is my specialty. So I focus predominantly on survivor aftercare. My other focus is child sexual abuse material in the digital space. So this is a hyper focus for mine, and it is almost impossible to get through a case against one of these tech platforms. But I think it's speaking from a place of privilege, and I understand why folks would be upset about FOSTA-SESTA. I wasn't particularly happy about it when it passed either, but I think it's very disingenuous and disgusting to dance on the trauma of these minor survivors that are begging to, there are many survivors that are trying to get through cases right now that cannot receive any justice. These platforms fight them every single step along the way. So when people say that FOSTA-SESTA isn't used, we're trying to use it. We cannot receive justice. These platforms are bigger than the dang government, and the government's huge. So have some respect. Not you, Spike. I'm not trying to spaz on you. I'm just saying, like, have some respect for these minor survivors that are currently in lawsuits that are trying to get this FOSTA-SESTA through. I don't think people understand. I don't.
So do you think that FOSTA-SESTA wasn't strong enough? Because I know another concern on the anti side was that it was also targeting legitimate sex work. Do you think that it should have been done differently, or that it wasn't strong enough? Where do you think that it went wrong?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, it's a horrible hot mess from top to bottom. I mean, all right. So you have platforms that can knowingly monetize and profit off of child sexual abuse material and human trafficking. Let's stick to the most egregious, the child sexual abuse material.
Yeah.
It's not a small amount. In 2020 alone, over 65 million child sexual abuse material images and videos were reported to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. This year alone, it's gone up 400%. So when we get the final numbers in January to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is just a United States organization, I'm estimating, I mean, so far I know there's been 100 million reports of child sexual abuse material from the digital space. This is Facebook, this is Twitter, this is Snapchat. 100 million reports of child sexual abuse material to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's not a small number. This is what we have already. Like, so this is what we have in 2021. It'll probably be higher than that. I'm guesstimating like, it'll probably be like 125 million reports by the time the year's through. But what I know for sure, it's 100 million at this point. This is not a small number. So these are children that are being violently sexually assaulted. We're not talking about, questionable whatever. We're talking about violent sexual assault. Now, that being said, actually, let me back up a little bit. There is some room in there for also like self-generated content, which happens a lot. Self-generated content for the youth. They're taking selfies, they're taking pictures and posting it themselves.
Right.
But at the heart of it, what we're talking about is the violent child sexual abuse material. And we're not talking about the dark web. This is reported from like Twitter.
Yeah.
This is reported from Twitter. In 2020 alone, Twitter had 65,000 reports of child sexual abuse material to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. That's 65,000. That's not a small number. I mean, so yeah, FOSTA-SESTA sucks. What the heck are we supposed to do? Let these platforms continuously monetize and profit off of child sexual abuse material and human trafficking? Like, no, not on my watch. No. We're not going to let them continuously profit off a human rights violation against children. And by the way, if it just affected United States citizens, we might see some justice. This affects the most vulnerable populations in the world.
Right.
Philippines. So this is not a joke. So when we talk about FOSTA-SESTA, I know everybody is in their feelings. I know, I get it. Trust me. I'm also deep on the privacy side rights of, any folks that follow me closely know I'm very intense about digital privacy rights. It's almost more of a passion for me than human trafficking at this point. It's very important to me. But to dance on the trauma by belittling it, by saying we don't have any other option. So I want folks to think about that. But anyway, what do I think could be better? Completely decentralized platforms. Completely decentralized platforms will help. because we won't have to go through the red tape of the government or the platforms to remove this harmful and abusive content. That's my hope for where it's going to go. I'd like the government involved in things as little as possible, of course. But my only hope is decentralized platforms. I don't think that there is an answer besides that, but I could be wrong.
No, I tend to agree. I think that, you're now dealing with both government bureaucracy and big tech bureaucracy.
Right, them both.
Again, you're having to go through both of them at the same time. Whereas in a decentralized platform, if it's, you're basically contacting the person who runs that node or server and, assuming that they're like the vast majority of people that don't want that kind of content on their server, that's going to be an easy thing to isolate, either by them removing it and reporting who did it, or by them refusing to, and you can go, yep, you're the pedophile, and you can spot them much more easily and much more quickly that way. So no, I tend to agree with you.
Honestly, Spike, my hope is deeply rooted in the future. I'm very excited. I'm very excited for the progress of where things can go with decentralized. I'm very, very excited for this. I was kind of black-pilled before I figured that out. But then I was like, oh, there's some hope. So I'm very hopeful. I'm very, very hopeful. And I wouldn't be so passionate about the false assessor thing. I mean, honestly, if someone has a better idea or option, I'd love to hear it. But people only want to complain and speak from a place of privilege instead of speaking to the survivors that have been affected by this, that are trying to seek justice. And that speaks volumes to me. And I'm sorry I'm so passionate about it. I really care deeply about these survivors. I'm very close to some of these survivors that are currently in lawsuits that are using that law, and they can't get justice, Spike.
Yeah.
They can't. These big tech platforms try to have case dismissed.
Because they don't want the liability. Yeah. They don't want the liability, even if it's not even if we don't.
But it is if one case gets through, it'll set that precedent. What's going to happen, right, Spike, is if that one case gets through, I'm praying that it's the Twitter John Doe 1 and John Doe 2 case. But if that one case gets through, it'll set the precedent. And then, for tech companies, it'll go from there. But we'll see. I have hope.
Yep. One of the big debates, and this was also happening during FOSTA SESTA and even before that, is obvious. Often, especially in corporate media and government officials, there's a conflation between voluntary sex work and sex trafficking. They don't
Sure.
Make any kind of delineation between that. I will say, especially after hearing stories like yours and others who survived sex trafficking, that on the outset may have at that time looked like voluntary sex work to not just to an observer of it, but even to some of the people who had been coerced and defrauded into thinking that this was at least partially their decision. Is it hard sometimes to see that line between? I mean, obviously we know the difference between voluntary sex work and sex trafficking is that anything voluntary is free of, as you said, fraud, force, or coercion, free of any kind of aggression, but sometimes that can be hard to spot, right? Especially if we're talking like fraud and coercion, that can actually be hard to spot. Is that difficult sometimes to delineate between what's being done voluntarily and what's being done in a coerced or defrauded manner?
Yeah, any buyer of mine would have thought I was there willingly, so there would have been no question. You learn how to act in order to stay alive, so that was. You learn how to play the role and get the job done so that you could stay alive. It's, right. A lot of times survivors have quotas or victims have quotas. So you can't go home unless you make a certain amount. If you do go home without making that amount, you're going to get your tuchus beat. So, you know better than to do that. So, because it's harder to make money with a black eye. But, I think one thing that drives me crazy is that folks don't know the difference between willing adult sex work, willing adult entertainment, survival sex, and then human trafficking. people like to shove them all into one category. They do the exact same thing with human smuggling and human trafficking. It seems like whatever fits folks' specific agenda or political agenda or agenda period is what they use to shoehorn it in. It's really disingenuous and actually disgusting. I think if folks truly cared, they would speak about the most vulnerable and work up from there. That's what I think. You speak about the most vulnerable possibly impacted, and then you work up from there. You don't go with like the most privileged and then work down. You start with the most vulnerable and then you work up from there. I don't know. I'm not like a policymaker or whatever. Republicans are particularly just gross. I don't know. Maybe they're not. I mean, Republicans and the left are just particularly gross about this issue because they just cannot not make it a political agenda, which as far as I'm concerned is re-exploiting those who have already been exploited again.
Right.
To political.
And that was actually my next question. Where is that line, right? Between someone who's even in my talking about this and promoting the episode and I'm thinking the whole time I'm thinking, at what point am I crossing a line of not just bringing attention to this, but where is that line of where I'm sort of re-exploiting someone, which is why I said early on I was like, I want you to define what
like
you
you're
feel
a
comfortable
sweetheart.
talking about.
I would never think that of you.
No, and it's certainly nothing that I'm intentionally doing, obviously, but there is that kind of, it's a very like quick line that you can cross between making sure that I'm highlighting this and platforming your advocacy and saying, hey guys, who wants to hear about a really salacious story, and which is why I made a point of not doing that. Do you often, like when you're being interviewed, does it sometimes feel like you're like they're going into that let's find out the salacious thing to have all the eyeballs on this route, or not really?
No, I've never felt like that.
Right.
Gosh, now I think about it, thank you actually for bringing that up. I felt re-traumatized, but it wasn't the interviewer's fault. It was my own personal self it was also like, it was weird. It's weird being a public survivor, and a public survivor leader, and then a public survivor advocate, which are totally different. And by the way, for anyone who's interested, you could be a survivor advocate. You don't need to be a survivor. Call your local organization to find out how you can serve. Get trained, get certified, get your background check, and start serving survivors. But no, it's been, honestly, Spike, it's been like the best. It's been like such an awesome journey because I just never thought anything that I just never thought I had anything worth saying that anyone would ever care about or would ever make a difference. But I've been also very, very selective about whom I do my interviews with.
Right.
Whether it be a comedian or the Hoteps or the Blaze or like OAN, believe it or not, or whomever I do my interviews with. That being said, I've also opened it up to everyone from all sides. I offered to go on Young Turks. I've offered to go a lot of places because I firmly believe that my presence and vibe would probably shine through. My only deal with stepping forward as a public survivor leader is I didn't want to have my voice silenced, and I didn't want it to be edited or, I probably don't feel exploited because I probably haven't done much with the corporate press. That's probably why I don't feel exploited, to be honest.
Yeah. Because you haven't had someone.
If I'm thinking about it deeply, I mean, I did stuff with like NBC and, but I haven't gone on CNN where I have to break down my life in like a 30-second soundbite.
Right. Or have someone probing into the part that's going to elicit the tears and all of that stuff and get the audience, in this very special interview, we're going to make this person cry. There was an old Saturday Night Live skit from like the 90s, and it was what was that guy's name? Kevin Nealon, and he was at Kevin Nealon makes celebrities cry, and so it was like different segments where he would have a celebrity and he'd say, "And your dog just died, right?" Well, yeah, I mean, she died 2 years ago, and how did that feel? And like whatever they could get to try to get this person to cry,
Right.
and that's what it feels like often. So one thing I wanted to talk about, because I do want to get into how we can help people, but one of the most compelling things I've heard you talk about, and this was at Freedom Fest, was about parallels that you see between abusers and another organization, and the things that you see. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. And before we leave tonight, I just want to say, Spike, I love your haircut. When you turned to the side, I was like, ooh, Spike has a fresh fade.
I just got my haircut.
No, wait, stop.
Literally.
Wait till you're on the full screen. Put yourself on full screen and then turn.
Okay.
Because my fade is not fresh. Yes, show them, Spike.
I just got this. It's and it goes all the way around too.
It looks so good, Spike. When you turned in the opening, I was like, oh, he has a fresh, crispy fade, and I'm out here woofing.
Just got it done. Yes. Thank you for noticing my fade. Thank you.
I always notice a fresh fade, a fresh, crispy fade.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, well, for full disclosure, I'm ANCAP, so, and I'm also part of Mises Caucus. But I didn't know that there was a Waffle House caucus. I thought that was cute. I was laughing hysterically. And I
created that 2 years ago.
What'd you say?
I created that 2 years ago when all the caucus fight. I'm in the Mises Caucus as well. But when all the caucus fighting, I joined it the day after it was founded. But they, when all that fighting between the caucuses happened, I made a fake fight between people over Waffle House versus Huddle House. Then I created the Waffle House caucus as like a Facebook tag group as a joke. We now have close to 8,000 members, and we are the fastest growing caucus in the party, largely because we don't do anything.
Okay. Well, maybe sitting back and being chill for libertarians would probably be better look than fighting with everybody on the internet.
I think so. It's helped. It's more people have joined it. So back
to your question. I mean, I never was fully able to make the parallels until 2020 happened. And then it started to become more and more clear to me that the government is an abuser. It's an abusive relationship that I don't feel like I can leave. It's the first and only relationship I've never felt like I could leave if I needed to. The government will stop at nothing to continue to seek power. The government will gaslight you at all costs. The government will isolate you from your family and friends, which, by the way, is a perfect breeding ground for Stockholm Syndrome. If you look up what it takes to create Stockholm Syndrome, so if you think of the government as the abuser and the citizens as the victims, that's why we see such mass Stockholm Syndrome, is because the government used the same tactics that an abuser or cult leader would use to mass control and get individuals in an abusive relationship that had Stockholm Syndrome. I mean, isolation, fear of death. And then only one thing can get you out, which would be their thing that they do in the arms. But, the reason why the government feels like a trafficker to me is because they take my money and I don't have a say in where it's spent. It's money that I worked really hard to get. And they take my money. I don't get a say where it's, they tell me when I can see my family and friends. It's just an abuser. And if folks think it's not going to happen to them, if folks think that they're not going to take it all the way, they're going to take it all the way. They're going to take it all the way to North Korea. And you're going to, if I could have one message to libertarians tonight, or really anyone, there'll be a point where you're going to have to decide whether or not you want to eat your own children to stay alive. It's how bad it gets. It's how bad it gets in North Korea, where every hair on your head is needed to be burnt for heat. Literally, no hair on your head goes to waste. Everything is owned by the state. You are married to the state. You'll own nothing, you'll have nothing, and you'll be looking at your loved ones deciding whether or not you want to eat them to stay alive. They will not stop ever. You don't want to let it get there. Don't fight on Twitter. It's not worth it. You fight the state. You fight those elites that are those seeking power. Libertarians and anyone that seeks liberty. I don't care if you're a Republican, anyone that seeks liberty, even if you're on the left, if you just believe in liberty, fight this, because they're not going to stop. And I'm telling you, you do not want to see the other side. You'll be sitting in the gulag wishing you had done something and wishing you had spoken up when it mattered.
Yeah. And then of course, when they put you in a situation of destitution, then they help you with a little bit of what they've stolen from you, which
100%,
is also a classic
Spike.
abuser. Yeah.
100%, Spike. That's a pimp.
Yeah.
It's called what it is. That's a pimp, Spike. But
Yeah.
they're not even a good. They're like a gorilla pimp. They're not even a good one, and they will stop at nothing, Spike. They will stop at nothing. The police will stop at nothing. And you know what's even worse, Spike, is they're going to celebrate. Those that think that they're virtuous are going to celebrate the slavery. They're going to celebrate it. They're going to celebrate the slavery. They're going to help build their own prisons. That's the worst part, you know. So that's what I hope people understand. This is not a game.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the gaslighting, right? Is they convince you that it's for your own good, and you happily skip your way into it. So I think
Germany. That's the way Nazi Germany was too. Just
So
read the
what are
Gulag
some-
Archipelago. Just go read the Gulag Archipelago. Anybody that thinks
Yep.
it ain't gonna go there, trust me.
Oh,
It'll
it can
go
go. It can go quickly. If you talk to Holocaust survivors or any survivors of any mass atrocity, one of the things that they'll talk about is how quickly it went from what they perceived as normal to holy crap, we're being rounded up. Like it is not this, decade. Well, sometimes it can be a decades-long process. Sometimes it's inside of 2 or 3 years. I mean, look at
That's what
even where
human
we went.
trafficking is like, Spike. That's
Yeah.
what human trafficking is like. And people think human trafficking can never happen to them. People think all this stuff can never happen to them. I'm telling you right now, when the government won't stop, we are all going to be victims of human trafficking, labor trafficking, sex trafficking. It's exactly what it is like in North Korea and throughout history. This is not a new thing, and it's happening currently in the world right now. So you don't need to look far. It is on the same globe as us. So I'm telling you, you have to figure out where your line is and stick by it. We are not, I'm telling you, Spike, it's really bad. And like you said, it is that you don't see it coming. It's very, it's sneaky. They act like it's for your good. It literally couldn't remind me more of human trafficking. But I think when I put it in that context, people understand. It actually kind of helps me out a little bit, Spike, because then people understand how I ended up in the position that I was.
Right.
And how other times throughout history, other people have ended up. So and the other thing too is be very mindful of, like, I just want to tell libertarians, like, please be very mindful. This is not time to play games. I mean, it is go time.
Yep.
I mean, if you're a shit poster, sorry if I cuss on your,
That's fine. We cuss on the show.
If you're a doo-doo poster, this doesn't have the same.
Doesn't sound as
ring.
powerful as shit poster.
It
No,
doesn't have the same ring, but yeah, I mean, if you're a shit poster, that's cool. Just stay out of the way. Trust me, I'm building up my platform so that when it's go time, I can get the message to as many people as possible, period.
Yep. Absolutely. Now on that, so this is actually.
I think I got so intense on this podcast.
No, listen, that's good. This is good stuff. We've talked about all of these different issues. I did want to end on this. What can we do now as individuals and working together to fight this? How can we identify it? What are when you go around and you're telling people, what we can do to fight it? What are some of the things that I and others that are watching this can be doing right now and start doing to help fight trafficking?
Sure, that's a really good question. So trafficking is pretty broad. So you could start off by, pushing for accountability on how our products are made, how our fruit is picked, things of that nature. That's always good. Vote with your dollar, so to speak. So if you think that something is made with slavery, or if you know that slavery is in the supply chain, you could do it that way. When people always ask me, how do you spot survivors? How do you spot survivors? My answer to that is, how would a survivor spot you? How would a survivor spot you? Because you don't run up to someone and say, are you a victim of human trafficking? Or if you see something that seems suspicious, if you call 911 right away, you could be putting that victim's life in danger if they are a victim. This is life or death. It's not a joke. But how could a survivor victim spot you? Are you a safe person? Did you smile when you walk past in the airport? Do you have open energy, a friendly vibe? And if someone did talk to you, hey, if you're a parent, a caregiver, somebody that works in a faith-based organization, a school counselor, if a child disclosed to you, would you have the resources available and know who to call? We do have a 24-hour, 365-day a week hotline here in the United States. Very grateful for that. You can call if you have questions, if you have tips.
What's that number? I'll put it in the chat.
Be great. Literally every podcaster asks me, and literally I post it almost every single day, and I've never memorized it, but I'll look it up. Okay. It's actually the first thing that pops up when you just Google the words human trafficking, so it's pretty easy. 1-888-373-7888. So that's 1-888-373-7888. If a survivor is in immediate danger, they do also have a text feature on their hotline as well. It's the humantraffickinghotline.org. They offer 200 plus languages, which I think is really cool. You never know where a victim survivor is going to be from.
Oh, yeah.
So in the United States, so I think it's really cool. Canada has a human trafficking hotline as well. But how could a survivor spot you? Are you a safe person? I think that that's very important. When you sit down at a diner or a bar or on an airplane, do you say hi to the person next to you? Hi, just something nice. Are you a nice person? There are always things that folks say you can look for, but I don't go by that. I don't go by what they say, because they always say, like, oh, people that aren't making eye contact, or people that are dirty. Folks that are on the spectrum might not make eye contact. Someone being dirty might just be a set of circumstances. It doesn't necessarily, some things like, if you're a healthcare professional, frequent STIs, maybe right. Bruises, bite marks, cigarette burns. But healthcare professionals should know how to deal with that.
Right, right.
And be able to tell if an individual is not allowed to be left alone, even in situations that would be private and can't answer for themselves. That's kind of sometimes, but the world is made up of different types of people. So we hate to judge a book by its cover. So that's why I say, let a survivor of human trafficking spot you by having open energy. And if and when they do reach out, the other thing too, I'm not a big proponent of like forcing folks to leave unless they're a minor.
Right.
You offer support, you plant seeds, you offer resources. And if the survivor's ready to leave, it's the same thing with the government, by the way. I feel the same way with the government. If you force someone to leave a Stockholm Syndrome situation or a trauma bonded relationship, it could actually strengthen the relationship with the abuser. So you have to be very mindful. And that's why I was like trying to tell people the other day on Twitter, and nobody really vibed with it. But I was like, yeah, I mean, if you try to force people away from this corporate press and this government tyranny, I don't think they're going to be as receptive if you actually just met them where they were at and planted seeds.
Right.
That's how I feel. I feel like it actually probably strengthens their relationship with the government and with the propaganda, to be honest.
So something you said.
All right, that's kind of intense.
No, something you said made me incredibly sad, and I want to make sure that I'm interpreting what you said, because you said one of the best things we could do is just be open and making eye contact and smiling with people, not in a creepy way, but just in a just general friendly vibe. Are there people what I took from that is that there are people right now who are so are in the midst of being trafficked, and literally if someone would even just look at them, if they were just out and about at the airport, at a restaurant, walking down the street, and if someone actually made a human connection with them for 5 seconds, that would be enough for them to be able to at least begin the process of escaping. But we're so all compartmentalized that this person who's basically trapped in a cage surrounded by people, everyone is so isolated and compartmentalized that there's no one they can even really effectively reach out to, and certainly not in the limited time and space that they have to do something like that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Yes, essentially. I mean, we are so self-obsessed. We're so caught up in our own world. We're looking down at our phone. We're posting on social media. And human trafficking survivors and victims are walking amongst us. Now, granted, every situation is completely different, but I think simply just, I mean, I'm one of those people where if I sit down next to you at an airport, you're probably going to spill your guts. I don't know why I got that vibe. I try to stay to myself sometimes, but I like talking to people, but there is something. This is going to be hilarious because I've talked most of this conversation that I'm even going to say this, have the gall to even say this, but there is something about letting folks give an opportunity to talk about themselves. When I sit down to talk to people, perfect strangers, which by the way, I mean, people are more, almost more comfortable telling something to a complete stranger that they'll never talk to again. But when I sit down and talk to people, most people have suffered very deeply. Many survivors of sexual assault, especially from within the home, sex abuse. I mean, I'm just talking about like at a bar, which sounds so depressing, but like a bar, even if I just have the most random things and I don't bring it up to people. It's not like hey, my name is Eliza. I'm a survivor advocate for those affected by human trafficking. What do you do? That's like such a buzzkill. Right. People think I'm like a hairstylist or a makeup artist. I'm fine with that. But when I tell people, it definitely opens up a conversation. And I find that many people are survivors, especially in my case, I meet many males that are survivors of sexual assault and molestation that have never really told anyone, or, that have never really told anyone. So I think just being an open person, like literally just like looking up from your phone and saying hi. I can't hear you, Spike.
No, listen, there's two things that I got from that. One is that there's a really powerful and simple thing all of us can be doing, but the big takeaway that I'm just picturing being in the shoes of someone who, is in a survival situation where they're doing something they don't want to do, whether we're talking labor trafficking, sex trafficking, whatever. And like they're, we always picture it's like if they can just escape the basement they're trapped in, and it's not. They're at the airport. And they're surrounded by hundreds or thousands of people, but no one's.
I mean, they could be in bottle service at the club. They could be anywhere. They could be literally anywhere. But the other thing too, Spike, you have to put yourself in the mind frame of someone has coerced you into thinking. Your mind isn't necessarily. You're seeing things not 100% clearly. Right. So you're not seeing the world clearly, and it's not their fault. That's a trafficker does their job correctly. That is part of a trafficker's job, is to not get you to see it correctly. So they might not even know that they're being exploited. I'll give an example. So I was in a domestic violence relationship with my ex-husband, which I said earlier. He was in the military and he was deployed. And I was on a flight with one of my woman friends from the base. We were on an airplane flight because over in Europe, you could fly cheap, easy, quick little Orion Air flights. And I'll never forget, I looked at her and I was joking about something about like, oh yeah, he pushes me down the stairs. And before he left, he tried to smother me with the pillow. And I was joking about it. And all she did was she looked at me and she was like, so he had tried to killed me before he left by smothering me with a pillow, and he had pushed me down the stairs multiple times. But I was joking about it like it was like some funny thing, and she looked at me and she was like, "That's not normal. That's abuse."
Right.
So when I found out that I was a trafficking survivor, it took an advocate explaining, because I always thought it was like the back of a semi truck. I always thought it was like ropes around my wrists, chains,
Right.
duct tape
Yeah.
on my mouth. I thought it was like back of a semi truck. I was conflating smuggling with human trafficking. Once someone had to explain it to me, and I still had a difficult time processing it, but I knew I was getting physically abused, and I knew I didn't always want to be in every situation, and that was a point. So if you can get folks to just speak a little, you could identify, and you don't tell someone, you just say, that matches exactly, and I'm going to let you choose whether or not you identify that way, but I just want to let you know what the law says, and that would qualify
like.
in trafficking.
Yeah.
And then it took me a while, because I never want to be seen as a victim. I was like, tough girl, never wanted to be seen as a victim, and didn't want it to seem like, oh, I was trying to be some, you know what I mean? I just didn't want to seem a type of way. And then I was like, wow. And then when I look back and I looked at all the situations that had happened, I was like, dang, I really was. I just didn't know it. So same thing with labor trafficking too, you know, just because someone wanted to come into the country. By the way, not all labor trafficking happens with folks that are undocumented, but yep. I'll just speak up to that specific, like that specific, I don't know, example. Mm-hmm. You know, someone's past, you know, someone's identification, someone can be in debt bondage. They might feel like they paid to be in this country, like they begged to be in this country, they paid to smuggle into this country, they did the most to come into this country. They might feel like they are getting what they deserve, or maybe like this is the best they can have, but they're actually a victim of human trafficking. And that's not right. No matter whether or not you're documented or undocumented in the country, it's not right to exploit someone for labor. That's slavery.
Yeah. So really the best things we can do, besides obviously advocacy for accountability and so forth.
Sorry, I didn't answer your question at all.
Yeah,
so the best thing you could do is get educated about the crime. The crime is really very nuanced and very complex. Best thing you can do is get educated about the crime. The best thing you can do is volunteer or donate locally. Research your local organization. Very frequently, I post a list of over 2,000 organizations globally that serve survivors of human trafficking. Find an organization that matches with your beliefs. And I think that volunteering and getting involved locally, even if it's just dropping off baked goods once a month or something like that, whatever you can do to get involved locally. If it's, just calling up a survivor safe house, hey, it's winter time. What do you folks need? Do you need socks? Do you need coats? You need Amazon gift? Like, what do you need? How can I best serve you? And then also too, I tell folks, use your time, talent, and treasure to serve the survivor space. If you have money, that's awesome. If you have a talent, like if you're a carpenter, call up your local survivor safe house, ask if they need something fixed in the safe house. You don't even need to see the survivors. They can move all the survivors that, everybody can go on a, activities day, and you could fix something in the safe house. But figure out where you best fit. But whomever you are, I guarantee you have a skill that can be used for survivors of human trafficking. And then to prevent, you would be education and awareness in your local community. That is always going to be the best. That's always going to be the best. Okay. Prevent the crime from happening in the first place. And number one, above and beyond everything else, is internet safety. Please, if you're a parent, caregiver, grandparent, please, internet safety for the youth. Please.
Okay. That's
Please.
I know it's weird. I don't have kids, so I certainly, far be it for me to say you're not parenting your kids right. But I often will see this disconnect. And I'm not going to call any individual out because honestly, it's prolific. But like people with teenage kids who have absolutely no idea who their friends are, have absolutely no idea who they're, what media platforms they're on, what social media they're on, what they're doing, what they're saying. And I mean, okay, your kid's 19, 20 years old. At some point, you're going to not know. We're talking like 14, 15-year-olds. Oh, they're on that thing all the time. I don't even know who they're talking to.
But you know what though, Spike? I have grown adult women and survivors in my life where every time they hop into an Uber or Lyft, I know every single time, you know, I mean, there's like, you know, especially with the survivors in my life, because it just helps. But I mean, I know where their trip is going. I know who they're going to hang out with. It's not weird to be overly cautious at any age. I mean, I don't do certain things, even as a 40-year-old woman, because it's not common sense at this point. Right. Does that make sense? So yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but no, I don't think parents fully understand. I mean, most human trafficking, most abusers are meeting their victims on Facebook, which is so weird that I guess Facebook at scale, it does make sense. But I mean, Facebook, Snapchat, that's where these traffickers are meeting your children. They're going to promise them a better life. The life that they're going to promise them seems really glossy. And your children are going to buy it, and they're going to start sending them nudes and images, and those images and videos are going to haunt them for the rest of their life. You don't want that to be what happens. You don't want your child to go meet some random pedo that was a total catfish 3 states away. You don't want that to be your life, all because you just didn't know what your child was doing on the internet, something that's very simple. And I think that this is on all of us, you know, same deal. You know, I don't have my own children, but I try to be an accessible, non-judgmental ear for the youth. If they want to come talk to me about something, and, you know, you meet them where they're at. You meet the youth where they're at. But if they feel judged, if they feel pressured, they're not going to be transparent. If you think your children don't know how to make secret profiles or do all that, they're very tech savvy. They know how to do it all.
Yeah, this isn't spy and trick them. This is let them know that you care for them and want to be a part of that.
So
and
much,
make sure that they're protected. Yeah,
an open and honest conversation. And people always ask me too, when's too young? We have cartoons available. There's cartoons available for children of all ages that talk about internet safety in a fun way that's not just starts to get them into the flow.
Yes. Hopefully it's more effective than my don't talk to stranger videos they showed us when we were kids that made talking to strangers seem really cool. And it was like it had the opposite. This guy wants to take you somewhere and show you things your parents don't. And it was like, that sounds great. And then I didn't know what
I want to know what the stranger wants to show me.
It wasn't very effective. I was like, this stranger sounds amazing. So it then turns out, no, you really shouldn't talk to him. But so, okay. So we've learned a lot. We've delved into a lot of things. And I thank you so much for coming on. I greatly appreciate it. I hope to have you on in the future. Before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to give your final thoughts. Anything you felt like we didn't get a chance to talk about, anything that you want to promote, any websites, phone numbers, your social media, how people can reach out to you, literally anything that you want to talk about for as long as you want to talk about it. Eliza Bleu, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Spike, so much for having me on. You are freaking amazing. Sometimes I listen to the Freedom Fest speech after. That was only the second speech that I had ever done live in front of an audience because of when I stepped forward. And when you had walked in the room, I was so elated. It meant so much to me. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, politician came to hear this pleb speak about her woes. But it meant a lot to me, and it still does. And I really appreciate the support. And I think that you're somebody that really truly cares a lot about people, and it shows, and it means a lot. And you're willing to listen to different people. And I think that really means a lot to me, Spike. It goes a long way. So I'm excited to see what you have planned in the future. As far as folks go, don't let internet privacy rights slip through the cracks. Don't ever let anyone use human trafficking or child sexual abuse materials as a Trojan horse to get through government interests or big tech interests. Be very mindful of that. Although it is a very real crime, And although it devastates a lot of lives, under no circumstances should this crime be used as an excuse to gain access and control and mass surveillance over all citizens. This is very important, just because of the crowd I'm talking to. Be there for the survivors in your life. I have a high gut feeling that the Ghislaine Maxwell verdict will be read tomorrow. And regardless of however it goes, please be there for the survivors in your life, because anytime there's a big case going on like this, it takes its toll on survivors, even that weren't directly impacted by the crime. So always let survivors know that they can, and any survivor that's watching, they can reach out to the hotlines, our National Sexual Assault Hotline, our Domestic Violence Hotline, and our Human Trafficking Hotline run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Also does our Suicide Lifeline. If you're struggling at any point with past or recent trauma, you can reach out to any of the hotlines at any time. They will assess your needs and serve you to the best of their ability. A trained advocate will answer the phone. And you can call anonymously, and it's judgment free. It's also LGBTQ friendly, LGBTQ plus friendly, and 200 plus languages. So that's really important. And if this conversation's at all affected you tonight, like, please reach out to one of the hotlines just to process through with an advocate. And I guess my final message is that there's a lot of hope and we will win in the end. But you either have to be willing to stand up for freedom and on the side of liberty, because you know where it could go. You know where it will go if we don't fight. Everybody thinks it won't happen to them, but I'm telling you, it can and will happen to you. And you don't want to be sitting on the other side of what's coming. So please take your freedom very seriously. Please take your freedom very seriously. I don't know how much more to stress that, Spike. I value my freedom so much. I can't even articulate it fully. Yeah, hopefully maybe one day I will be able to, but I just hope folks value their freedom, because you don't want to lose it. Trust me. The days are long and you wake up every morning. When you lose your freedom all the way, Spike, you wake up every morning, you wish you were dead. And every moment that you're awake, you wish you were dead. And you think only about dying, but you don't know how or why. And that's a horrible life. Right now, we have a good life. I'm sitting in a heated room with internet service, getting a chance to talk to somebody that I think is really cool.
Yep.
This is a good life. So you don't want to lose that. And I think that's all, Spike.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your thoughts.
I wish I had more of a white pill. No, the white pill is we will win in the end.
We're going to win. Liberty is going to win.
No, actually, you know what? The white pill is we're going to win in the end. The cathedral's completely crumbling. Corporate press is scrambling like a chicken with their head cut off. The corporate press has lost their mind. They're in desperation mode. So just remember that. And every time they do one of these big blunders, just know it red pills and white pills a lot of people.
Yeah.
So
it does.
It wakes people up.
Liberty is definitely going to win. How can people follow? What's the best way for people to follow you?
Yeah, sure. So my Twitter handle is at Eliza Bleu, ELIZABLEU. I saw the water you were drinking before. Is that spelled blue like blue?
Yes.
How do I not have any? That's my water.
Le Bleu.
That's my water, Spike.
That's your water. That's your water. So you can buy Eliza's water at Le Bleu.
No, that is not my water. I do not profit from that. If you want to tip me, you go to my Twitter tips. No, but so I'm on Twitter at Eliza Bleu, ELIZABLEU. And then I am on Locals, eliza.locals.com. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of really fun things coming up. So please stay tuned.
Yes, and everyone go follow Eliza if you aren't already. It is good water. It's not actually her water. She makes $0. I make nothing.
I make $0. If you want to throw dollars, I have my Twitter tips open. I'm completely independent. That's on purpose. Spike and I were talking about that before the podcast. Yep. He was like, "Hey, are you going to shout out any organization?" I was like, "No, I actually do everything I do completely independent. That's really intentional and on purpose, because then I can talk about politics and." Then I can't get canceled. Well, I don't know. They might try to cancel me, but I doubt it.
It's harder to cancel someone who's self-sufficient. Yes.
But yeah, so well, no, I work full time in the space, but I don't speak on behalf of any organization. So because I Spike, that's a whole other conversation. The government has its little hands in all these organizations. I don't even want to be affiliated publicly with all these.
Yes. So at Eliza Bleu is your Twitter handle. Everyone, please tune in and stay tuned with her. She's got big stuff coming up. Eliza, thank you so much for coming on. Stick around. I'm going to talk with you during the outro. But folks, thank you for tuning into this episode of My Fellow Americans. Tomorrow night at 8 p.m. on the Writer's Block, my co-host Matt Wright will be interviewing Amy Lepore, who is the duly elected vice chair of the Libertarian Party of Delaware. She will be updating on all the really fun stuff that's happening with the Libertarian Party of Delaware. It's actually gotten better in the last month, but yay. And then enjoy your weekend. Have a great weekend, whether you celebrate Christmas, whether you don't celebrate Christmas, whether you're one of these edgy pagan types, you celebrate Yule or solstice, whatever. I don't care.
Yeah, happy holidays, everybody.
Weekend. Have a happy holiday season or lack thereof. Whatever you do this weekend, enjoy it. And then be sure to tune in next week for the Muddied Waters of Freedom year-ender at the end of the year. That's going to be either, we haven't decided if it's Wednesday or Thursday, but it'll be either Wednesday or Thursday. You're not going to believe what day it is. And it's going to be me and Matt Wright. We're going to parse through the year's events, because this year is almost, I'm still coping with 2020, and it's about to be 2022. So come cope with us next week. And again, thanks again for tuning in. Join. Oh yeah, well, I don't have an episode next week. We're doing the year ender. So again, thanks for tuning in so much. I will see you next week. I'm Spike Cohen, and you are the power. God bless, guys.
They say about an eye for an eye in a time when the blind lead the blind. Who am I to deny? I would cry when a loved one dies. I recognize that body outside, with the holes in the body that was alive. Now confined to a chalk outline. Find out how, but you never know why. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. It ain't even make it to the news at 9. That's my sister, mother, father, brother, son. That's one of mine. All these years I close my eyes, open up to only find I'm in line. There's